Hi there.
Hi there. Welcome to Silhouette's JB podcast. I'm Gia.
And I'm David. And this is the deepest dive into Jersey Boys you have ever taken, will take, tooken, have tooken, taken. Guys, refer back to the Erica Piccinini episode. She gives a great grammar lesson. It was great. Tooken, taken. She'll tell you.
No, it's so funny we bring up grammar because today we have a very special guest who I respect very much in the journalism industry and also as a huge fan of the Four Seasons and Jersey Boys, and a special co-host who is back. So today we have Charles Alexander, who is coming on the show. If you're a Jersey Boys fan, you know who he is.
David Case called him one of the Jersey Boys' wise men. Like, there was like I'm not sure if wise men was the exact phrase he used, but it's kind of like this guy's a legend when it comes to Jersey Boys, when it comes to the Four Seasons. Charles Alexander, he wrote the liner notes to the cast recording, to the original Broadway cast recording. He wrote the foreword for the Jersey Boys souvenir book, that huge, beautiful coffee table book, and one of the biggest things he wrote for, he worked at Time Magazine for 23 years, and he wrote the famous article, A Handshake for All Seasons. That was the name of the article, A Handshake for All Seasons, talking about Frankie and Bob's famous handshake, one that started it all. And Rick Ellis and Marshall Brickman used that as, quote, key inspiration, unquote, for the show. And we've heard about him. We've heard all about him. Everyone's been talking to us about him, and we're so happy to have him on the show right now. And thank you to Howard Tucker, our associate producer and our co-host for this episode, for really, making that connection and putting us together. And we met Charles for the first time at Pamela Singer, who is another Jersey Boys fan and a doo-wop fan, Four Seasons fan, at her birthday party a few weeks ago. And he's just a wealth of knowledge, a wonderful man, and we're so happy to have him with us today.
Yes, we have friends in high places. We really do. So it's all thanks to Howard and Pam for bringing us all into the same room together. And also, Charles was amazing, where he couldn't make the Frankie Valli concert at Radio City this past weekend, but he offered us the seats, fourth row at Radio City to see Frankie. And that was unbelievable. Like, I don't know about you, David, but I never ever thought I would be able to sit in the fourth row at Radio City and see Frankie so close. But Howard and David and I were so lucky to see Frankie in March at the St. George Theater on Staten Island. We're going to see him again, and it was really just an amazing experience. We have a lot to be thankful for, but this time Charles is going to be on the other side of the interview. And get this, it's really special. I don't know if Charles knows this, but tomorrow is actually the anniversary of the day that legendary article was published on May 11th, 1987. So, of course, we're recording this on May 10th, 2022. And this is definitely a historic night for our podcast. And we're so excited. Honestly, you're barely going to hear from us in this episode. It's going to be all Howard and Charles driving the conversation and us freaking out and having, hopefully, nice follow-ups. But without further ado, should we let them come on in?
Let's come on in, guys. All right, here we go. Hey, Howard and Charles.
Hey, welcome. Awesome.
Such fun to be here. Thank you for inviting me.
Thanks for coming on.
And thank you for including me as well. And I'd like to start, if I may.
Go ahead.
Charles, I believe that the day we met, if I'm not mistaken, was April 15th, 2007. We met at Sardi's at the Actors Fund concert with JLY. And if I can remember correctly, I had an extra ticket and I had two candidates. And I think you won the lottery, and we sat next to each other, and then we really got to know each other. And 1 month later, you and I spent not quite a whole week, maybe 4 days together at the LA opening, where we got to talk. I heard about the liner notes. I heard about your whole wonderful history. And then we went on to do the street signing together, the street naming together a year later. We were both up there, guys. It's on YouTube. Someone could have photoshopped me a little bit better, but it's on YouTube. I spoke, Charles spoke, Jim Petrecca spoke. Tony Valley was there. Darcel DeVito was there. Danielle Gaudio was there. And our friend Audrey Rockman was there too, who I believe had mentioned you much earlier. And then talking about the other side of the interview, this will be pretty quick, I promise. The other side of the interview, you and I were on a radio show together. I don't remember the questions, but we were both interviewed and you actually let me speak. You're the one with the history. I am an accountant. I was an accountant for like 50 years with very little knowledge, but you actually let me speak of the little I had. And and you and I saw Jersey Boys a lot together. Now, honestly, I was able to make those mezzanine stairs. I don't know that I could do it now. Charles always got the front row in the mezzanine for Jersey Boys. And we went to the Cosmic Diner beforehand. And I think you probably remember the uncle of one of my friends who did not stop talking the whole dinner. And you and I patiently listened. And I'm really grateful. And just let me go fast forward another few years. I really thought that on January 15th, 2017, my life was over because we closed at the August Wilson. And I figured that was it. It's never going to happen again. But it did happen again. It happened at the New World Stages in November where Bob Gaudio came. And unfortunately, Judy Parker had just passed away at that point. But it happened again. And then this last year, Gia and David introduced me to the podcast and I was able to join them and renew a lot of old acquaintances, not only with the cast members, but just in the last few weeks with Rick Ellis, with Steve Orich and Charlie Colello yesterday on the phone. No email, no Facebook, no private message, no text, on the telephone talking. And it's just been incredible. And that's now maybe led to even a post-Jersey Boys career where I'm working with Eva Heineman on the site High Drama. And I am reviewing, if you will, cabaret theater and some books. And we have a cable show every couple of weeks. She introduced me last week on a Saturday. And my audition tape was the podcast with Gia and David and Tristan Boyatel. And so anyway, Charles, thank you. And David and Gia, thank you so much. You've given me a real purpose in retirement, and I can't thank you enough. Okay, over to you guys.
Well, Howard, thank you for that introduction. We go way back. I remember well our week in LA and how you introduced me to Christopher Colley-Jones, among other people, and that was a great week. And you've always been one of the top Jersey Boy fans and a great friend of mine. So, thank you for being there with me all these years.
Very nice. Thank you, Charles. Okay, guys. You want to start?
Wow, that was beautiful.
Old friends, and it was all from not a handshake, but from a musical from 50 years ago. So cool. Oh, well, Howard, congratulations on your success. And we're so glad that we can all be together. And it's really all because of both of you. And it's really like both of you have really forged the way for so many of us who love Frankie Valli and the Four Seasons. And it just, the history wouldn't be there if it wasn't for both of you. And Charles, like for you really like doing your incredible article in 1987. But we want to get to know you more and how you also fell in love with the band. So can we go back to your early years when you first heard Frankie Valli and just everything in that time? We'd love to hear your story.
Well, first of all, I'm a little bit unusual in that I grew up in Tennessee, so I wasn't an East Coast Jersey person. Mm-hmm. But anyone who had a TV could tune into American Bandstand. And of course, the Four Seasons were on all the radio stations. So I just heard the music and I fell in love with the music. I didn't get to see them until 1967, after they'd been around for 5 years. They didn't come to Tennessee much, but I just loved the music and bought all the records. I can later on I can show you some of the 50, 60-year-old records I have. But then, later on, I had the good fortune to come to the Northeast and eventually get to meet them. Technically, the first time I ever came in contact with the Four Seasons was when my poor, long-suffering mother drove me and two of my cousins to Nashville, Tennessee in 1967. It's the first time I saw the Four Seasons. Unfortunately, Nick Massey was gone. I never saw him, but Joe Long was there and he was great. And we wanted their autographs. And so after the concert, we waited out in the parking lot. Everybody else left. My two cousins and I were literally the only people left in the concert waiting for the Four Seasons to come out. Now, Joe and Tommy left by some other exit, but Frankie and Bob finally came out. And of course, we were just kind of speechless. We didn't say anything. They didn't say a word to us. I had this program. This is a program from 1967. And I was just speechless, and I wasn't really prepared. I didn't have a Sharpie or anything. I don't even know if Sharpies had been invented back then, but I just kind of nervously thrust this program at Frankie, and you can't even see the autograph, but it's there in pencil, I think. And so this is a Frankie Valli autograph from 1967.
Wow.
Now little did Frankie know, not saying a word to me, that this teenager who thrust the program at him would one day be writing his biography, and he would be hiring me to do stuff, and we'd be working together. So that was kind of an inauspicious beginning, but it was thrilling, and that was the last time I saw them in Tennessee. But
Bob also signed it?
I think one of my cousins got Bob's signature, but no, they were like one and done. They were leaving as fast as I could. They were nice to stop, and my poor mother was there waiting in the car, and finally we got to go home. We it was late at night. We were from a small town south of Nashville. It was about an hour drive home. So my mother was a real hero to let us wait that long. So fortunately, I went to school in Boston, so I got to start seeing them in concert quite a bit. Obviously, I didn't talk to them, but they used to play Symphony Hall in Boston every year, so I would go see them. One time I was on the front row. That was awesome. And then fast forward, I moved to New York, and I was in journalism school. And they played the Madison Square Garden in 1976. You remember Casey and the Sunshine Band? I know.
Of course.
You young people may not have heard of them, but they had songs like Get Down Tonight. Anyway, They opened for the Four Seasons, and this was right when the Four Seasons were having their second big wave of popularity, where they'd had Who Loves You and 63, Oh What a Night. And so the crowd went wild for Casey and the Sunshine Band.
They were opening for the Seasons?
Yeah, they were opening for the Seasons.
Wow.
And
the
crowd was so wild for them that I wonder, gee, will the Seasons be able to follow these guys? The crowd as wild. But then the Seasons came out, and it was twice as loud. It was a great concert.
Oh, I'm surprised too, David, really, because Casey and the Sunshine Band were huge.
Yeah, they were huge, but they opened for the Four Seasons.
Right.
Well,
the reason I mentioned this concert is this was my second really lame attempt to meet the Four Seasons, because here I was in New York. I was in journalism school, and I thought maybe they would be interested in meeting me. So I wrote this long letter explaining who I was, and I was in journalism school, and I'd like to interview them. but I was totally naive. I didn't know that you contact a PR agent or anything. So I wrote this letter, and I was hoping I could like hand it to one of the band members or something and say, give it to Frankie, give him this letter, and maybe they'll contact me. So I was kind of sitting in mid-level of this huge place, Madison Square Garden, but I walked down to the front and stood close to the stage and made some casual remark to the security guard, and that was a mistake because he said, where's your seat? Let me look at your ticket. Get back up there to the peanut gallery. So I was totally flummoxed, and in a last-ditch effort, I tossed the letter onto the stage. Of course, I never heard from Frankie Valli and the Four Seasons at that time. The letter, I'm sure, promptly went into the trash. So that didn't work. So anyway, I graduated from journalism school, went to work at Time magazine, and that was it. The Four Seasons, Frankie's last big hit during that era was Grease in 1978.
Yeah, that was huge. Yeah.
Yeah. But that was their last big hit at the time, and things kind of quieted down. They put out a live album in 1980. I kept following them as best I could, but they weren't doing much. Finally, in 1986, I was really busy. I had just been named business editor of Time. So I wasn't really thinking at all about the Four Seasons, even though they were still my favorite group. In 1986, they headlined a concert, a big oldies concert at the Meadowlands Arena in New Jersey.
Right.
The Four Seasons were the headliners, the Spinners, the Righteous Brothers, and Tommy James and the Shondells. So it was a great lineup. But it wasn't advertised much. I mean, maybe it was advertised on radio stations, but I didn't have time to listen to Top 40 radio then. It wasn't advertised in the New York Times. It was sort of a miracle that I even heard about this concert. But one day I was walking around Rockefeller Center in Manhattan, and I see a bus, and on the side of the bus is an ad for this concert. That's how I found out about it, was this bus. This bus changed the course of my history, because I saw this. I said, oh, Frankie, he's playing in New Jersey at the Meadowlands. I can go see him. He had a new album out. I didn't even know, I'd lost track of it. I didn't even know he had a new album out. It was called Street Fighter. So anyway, I started thinking about it. I said, I'm an editor at Time magazine now. I bet I can meet Frankie and Bob. And so I was pretty shameless about this. I wasn't the music writer, arts editor, anything. I was the business editor. What business did I have interviewing Frankie Valli and Bob Gaudio? But I said, I don't care. I want to meet my idol. So I'm going to call them up. By that time, I knew that you call a publicity person. I knew how to do it. I'm going to call them up and ask for an interview. So I called up and said, I'd like to go to the show in the Meadowlands, and I'd like to meet Frankie Valli. I'm an editor at Time magazine. They said, sure, that's great. I had no idea about writing a story about them. They were very cold at the time. Yeah, they had a new album out, but it wasn't getting airplay or anything. So, I mean, they were still very big and very famous on the oldie circuit, but they weren't having hit records. So there was no story to be done, I was sure. So I was just shamelessly going to use my position to meet them under basically false pretenses, like I was going to write the story, but there's no story there. So, so I go out to the Meadowlands. The PR guy had me meet Frankie before the show. Bad mistake. Not the good time to talk to Frankie, because before a show, he's actually nervous. Now here's a guy who's been doing concerts for decades, but you know, since I didn't have a particular story idea, I didn't have a lot of good questions for him. I mean, we talked a little bit, but he was nervous. He didn't really want to talk. He had this long line of jackets, a huge coat rack of jackets, all different colors. And what was mainly on his mind was, which jacket do I wear at this concert? So he was kind of stalking up and down the line of jackets. And I was just kind of sitting there awkwardly, not thinking of anything to say. So that my second encounter with Frankie Valli didn't go that great either. I saw him briefly after the show. He was much happier. He had his new bride, Randy, on his arm. He said, come to the party, but you know, I had to get back to Brooklyn from New Jersey. It was a work night, so I didn't go to the party. But anyway, I had met Frankie and at least talked to him a little bit.
Were any of the others there, Charles? Any of the other seasons?
I didn't talk to the other seasons. I actually talked to Don Ciccone, which was a surprise to me because by that time he had left the seasons and he was in Tommy James and the Shondells. So I talked to him briefly. Anyway, so that wasn't so great, but it gets better. Some weeks later, I had a business trip out to LA and I said, well, you know, it worked the first time, so now I'll ask for an interview with Bob Gaudio. Bob was living in LA at the time. So I put in the call to his people. And so they say, yeah, you can come up and talk to Bob. And he invited me to come up on a Sunday morning. He lived in Coldwater Canyon, which is in the hills above Beverly Hills. So I drove up to the address, rang the bell. A very pretty young woman answered the door and said, hi, I'm Judy Gaudio. We're expecting you, come on in. So she sat me down on the couch, offered me a cup of tea, and I'm waiting for Bob Gaudio, my idol, to come out. But I got to thinking, you know, I hadn't kept up with Bob. I may have read that his first wife died, but I didn't know he had been married again. But I'm thinking, Judy, she said Judy Gaudio. I wonder if that's Judy Parker, because the one thing I did know was all the songs and who wrote them. And I said, thought to myself, maybe that's Judy Parker. I know they were kind of a thing. They were not only writing partners, but they were partners in other respects. And so maybe that's Judy Parker. Maybe he married Judy Parker. So finally, I'm sitting there for about 30 minutes, sipping my tea and eating a croissant or whatever she gave me. Finally, Bob comes out. And the first, I guess my second encounter with Bob Gaudio, the first since 1967, he comes out and he's still in his bathrobe and slippers. So, okay, you know, he's not taking this interview too seriously. He's pretty casual. But I did a smart thing. Very early in the conversation, I said, is that Judy Parker? And that really impressed Bob, because then he know, oh boy, this guy knows us. He knows our music. He knows, and he immediately yelled out to the kitchen where Judy was. Hey, Judy, he asked if you're Judy Parker. You know, like, you're famous. This guy remembers you and that you wrote these songs. So that started it off well. We had a long conversation.
Did he get dressed eventually, or?
Yes, he did excuse himself for for a few minutes to get dressed. We must have had a little bit of lunch. I can't remember that too well, but you know, we had a long conversation, but still I'm thinking this is fun, but I still had no idea about writing a story. It was all false pretenses. But after, you know, a couple of hours of conversation, we started talking about their, he mentioned his partnership with Frankie. And I said, oh, you know, yeah, I've heard of that, but that's just for the Four Seasons stuff, right? He said, no, that's for everything. Everything we do. Like, he had, by that time, he had produced 4 successful Neil Diamond albums. He said, yeah, half of that money goes to Frankie. If Frankie's out on concert, I get half of that money because we have this deal on a handshake for all these years. At the moment, he was producing the soundtrack for the movie soundtrack for the movie Little Shop of Horrors. And he said, well, you know, Frankie's going to get half of this money. So I'm thinking, you know, this sounds like a good business story. So I started questioning him about this business arrangement. I said, you know, Bob, this could be a really good story. This could appear in Time magazine, even in 1986. Wow, this is unusual. This partnership you've had where you split everything. So he was warming up to the idea too. So, so the afternoon was fun. He drove me down to the studio and let me watch him at work in the studio working on this movie soundtrack. But 2 things I remember about that drive to the studio. One was that, you know, he had a Porsche and he drove me in that. Certainly the first time I'd ever ridden. I think maybe it's the only time to this day I've ever ridden in a Porsche. But he also said to me, he said, you know, I can't believe that it's over for Frankie. He is so good. His voice is so fantastic that I believe that he's going to have another big time in the sun. Something's going to happen, and he's going to be back. I just know it. Of course, you know, we know what happened with Jersey Boys made Frankie more famous than ever. And of course, Bob Gaudio worked very hard to make that happen. I think Bob, more than anybody else, was responsible for making sure that Jersey Boys finally happened. And we can talk more about that later if you want. But anyway, so this was a great day, a great interview. So I went back to New York. I immediately, you know, I hadn't had a good interview with Frankie, but now that I had a theme for the story, what I needed to do was interview Frankie and ask him about the partnership. So I immediately put in a request for an interview with Frankie, and you know, nothing happened immediately. It takes a while for PR people to.
Where was he living, Charles?
He was living in Fort Lee, New Jersey at the time.
Okay.
He had an apartment in Fort Lee, New Jersey.
Okay.
So, you know, I'm a very busy editor at times, so you know, I'm not thinking about this too much. I put in the request for the interview, so I just go back to my regular job, which is not writing about music celebrities. Anyway, I'm sitting at my desk one day and the phone rings and it's Bob Gaudio. Hi, it's Bob Gaudio. Where's that story you were going to do? And I said, well, Bob, you know, I put in a request for an interview with Frankie. I've got to interview Frankie before I can do it. He said, okay. 5 minutes later, phone rings again. I pick it up. It's Frankie Valli. oh my God, I'm not ready. You know, I haven't thought of any questions. I don't have my tape recorder hooked up to the phone. I can't do this. So I say to Frankie, would you please give me your phone number so I can call you back? And this was kind of gutsy because, you know, these guys are not in the habit of like giving out their phone numbers.
And no caller ID back then.
Yeah, there was no caller ID. Thank you for the historical help there. And so I nervously write the number down. He agrees to give it to me. And so I hang up and I'm thinking, man, you know, I'm foolish. What if I copied the number down wrong? I mean, what if he goes on this? I may have missed my big chance here, but I call him back. He's there. We have a great interview. So I do the story. I do the story, and you know, the rest is history. And as you said, it did.
In person, Charles, or on the phone?
The interview was on the phone. I've seen Frankie in person many times now, but the only time I've talked to him at length have been on the phone. That time and one time later when I did wrote the publicity material for his Romancing the 60s album.
Right.
Those are the only two times I've actually interviewed Frankie. You know, Gaudio he's the businessman. He really is Bobby businessman. So it's Gaudio who was the one who was dealing with me all the time, who, you know, hiring me to do this and asking me to do that. Frankie, you know, he's got a million fans. Everybody is milling around him all the time. So everybody comes to Frankie. So I really, you know, when it come to the actual business, I would deal with Bob Gaudio and I deal with Frankie's manager, not so much with Frankie.
Okay.
I mean, Frankie, you know, he knows my name, obviously. But to this day, I doubt that he could pick me out of the lineup because he has such a huge entourage of people around him.
Can I make a quick comment there, Charles?
Sure.
I've seen him maybe 10 times or so over the years. He knows my face. He doesn't know my name. Go ahead.
Well, with me, I think it may be the opposite. But you have a more memorable face than me, Howard. You're larger than life in many ways, if I may tease you a little bit. Anyway, yeah, I used to go up to Frankie after concerts and reintroduce myself, and I'd say, "Hi, Frankie, I'm Charles Alexander. I wrote that article in Time Magazine." "Oh, you did, man? That was a great article." And then I'd see him a couple of years later, and we'd have the same conversation. "Oh, you wrote that article. It was a great article."
Okay.
And then in later years, it would be different. It was, "Oh, you worked on that box set. That was a great box set.
Okay.
You wrote the liner notes for Jersey Boys. That was great." Anyway, Frankie's a great guy. So that's how that article came into being, and fortunately, it helped in the writing of Jersey Boys. So
Oh my God,
I'll take a small amount of credit for one of the greatest shows in Broadway history.
My God, yeah.
So you should.
Absolutely, you should.
It's literally two whole scenes about it.
Yeah.
Did you know the show? Well, obviously you did have a part in the show's beginning.
I didn't really have a part in the beginning. You know, I saw the second performance ever of Jersey Boys. I don't know why I didn't make it out to the very first point. This is in, I'm sure your faithful viewers know that it began at the La Jolla Playhouse in La Jolla, California.
Right.
And somehow I found out about it. I don't know why I didn't get out for the first the actual premiere of it, maybe my schedule wouldn't permit it. But I saw it I saw something like 3 out of the first 5 performances of it. If you've read the foreword to the Jersey Boys book, so you know that, I mean, Gaudio had told me about a decade earlier that he wanted to create a musical about the Four Seasons. And, you know, I thought he was totally nuts. I didn't see how that would make it on Broadway.
Right, right.
I didn't know their backstory. You know, they had great music, but they never had really good PR agents, so they had never, people didn't know about them as people very much. So, but of course, I just didn't know the dramatic story behind the origins of this group. So I thought this was a very quixotic venture, and it did take him a long time. There was a whole different set of Jersey Boys writer and a different Jersey Boys producer. There was a whole different version of the show that they rejected before Rick Ellis and Marshall Brickman finally came on the scene and wrote something really great. Anyway, I was determined to go the first week. Frankly, I thought it might be my only chance. I said, you know what? They're really going to do this play? I'm going to get out there in case it closes after 5 performances.
Right.
I've got to see this. I can't miss this. So I've got to get out there the first week. But
Did you meet anybody out there, Charles? Anybody? Was Bob there? Was Frankie there? Joe Pesci?
No, Bob, you know, I saw the play before Bob did. Bob had some sort of operation on his leg, so he was kind of laid up. But he and Frankie, they didn't want to go out in the beginning. They really tried to let this creative team, this great creative team, they tried to let them alone to work it out. They didn't want to get in at the beginning and start messing around with and raising objections. They wanted to let the team work out the kinks before they went to see it. So they didn't go to see it until it actually opened in La Jolla. I went to the second preview. They didn't go to previews at all. So I saw the production before Bob Gaudio did. He was by that time he had moved to Nashville, and not sure where Frankie was living at the time, but they didn't go see it. And Bob, I called up Bob on the phone because I had kept in touch with him all these years since I wrote the Time article.
Right.
And he said, well, I'm very interested in what you think of this play. So after you see it, report back to me. So I saw it before Bob. I loved it. And there's kind of two funny stories about the first couple of times I saw Jersey Boys. You know, I was sitting on the front row. I remember the second time I saw it, this lady is sitting next to me, and we get to talk, and I said, oh, you're gonna love this, because I had seen it the night. She said, well, how do you know I'm gonna love it? I said, well, I saw it last night. You're gonna love it. She said, well, why would you go to a play 2 nights in a row? So anyway, she starts my intermission, she said, this is great. I would like to go see this show every night also. Another thing, my wife went with me to La Jolla, not because of the play. My wife, you know, at best tolerates the Four Seasons. And she's more of like a folk music, Judy Collins type. personally. And I like Judy Collins too, but you know, she's not a big fan of Four Seasons, but she tagged along because a trip to the beach at La Jolla is pretty good. And she agreed to go. She agreed to go to it one night. So I think she went to it about the third night. And now this is a woman who's, you know, we've been married for how long? You know, 30 years or something. And at best she tolerates the Four Seasons, sees them occasionally. But so we're sitting there, and actually she traded seats with somebody because she didn't want to sit in the front row next to me because she didn't want to be that close. So here's a woman who could care less about the Four Seasons. And at intermission, she came to me and said, "This show is going to be on Broadway." And then after the show, she's like asking me all these questions, a new interest. She said, "Well, what happened to Nick Massey after this? And what happened after that? And how did," and she's suddenly like asking me all these questions. It's because of this show made this group so interesting to people. Anyway, so I went back home. My best friend, the late great Frank Ravello, who had this wonderful.
Oh my God! Yes, of course. My God.
Yeah, he was my best friend. Unfortunately, he died a few years ago. But he had this wonderful website.
Yeah.
And he said, "I want you to review the show for my website." So I wrote up a thing about the show. I called up Bob and I said, "Well, I really like the show." I said to Bob, "Don't change it. Don't do a thing. It's great. Don't mess with it. You've got to hit. Do not mess with it." That was my message to Bob. Of course, they did refine it for Broadway and actually did make it even better. But I thought it was so good, I didn't want him to change anything. And so he, and I said, I'm going to write something about it. So I sent him the link to what I wrote on the website. He called me up and said, I wasn't actually around. He left a message that he liked what I wrote. And then we stayed in touch, and as it got closer to a little bit closer to the Broadway opening, I got this email from him, and he invited me and my wife to have dinner with him and Judy in New York. And of course, that was a pretty thrilling idea. But interestingly, at that time, it was in my mind that I want to write about Jersey Boys in Time magazine. Now, by that time, I had retired from Time magazine a few years before, but I still wrote for them occasionally on a freelance basis. So I had an idea. I'm going to write about Jersey Boys in Time magazine. So I had two thoughts for Bob in response to his invitation. I said, "Look, I'm still a journalist. You know, there has to be kind of a wall between us. I have to maintain my objectivity, ha ha ha. So we'll have dinner with you, but you've got to let me pay for it. I can't like accept money. I can't accept a free dinner from you. That would be a violation of journalistic ethics."
Of course.
So I said, "Okay." So he says, "Okay, well, where do you want to buy me dinner?" And I said, "Well, you know, I know this is kind of corny, but why don't we have dinner at the Four Seasons, which is closed now, but was one of the most famous restaurants in New York. I once had lunch with Walter Cronkite at the Four Seasons. I mean, it was the place.
The world's most trusted man in the world.
Yeah, that's a long story. And that's for another podcast, like the time Walter Cronkite called me up in the middle of the night. But anyway.
We want to hear that too later.
Please.
Anyway, so we had dinner at the Four Seasons, he insisted on buying a bottle of wine. He said, I don't care about ethics. I'm going to buy the bottle of wine. Because he had actually had dinner the night before at the Four Seasons, the same table, except he'd had it with the one of the producers of Jersey Boys, Joe Grano. So he had dinner 2 nights in a row at the Four Seasons, and he just told the waiter, just give me that bottle of wine I had last night with Joe Grano. That was good. So, though somehow the waiter seems to know who he's talking about, and actually, if you looked in the menu at the Four Seasons, I mean, it was obviously not named after the singing group, but in the menu at the Four Seasons, if you flip through it, there was a picture of Frankie Valli and the Four Seasons in the menu at that restaurant.
Because
anyway, so we're sitting there having a great dinner, and suddenly he drops this bombshell on me. The real purpose of the dinner was to ask me to write the liner notes for the Jersey Boys cast album. Now, I mean, that was mind-blowing, to have my name in the same product, in a product that was produced by Bob Gaudio. That was just like beyond my wildest dreams. But as I mentioned to you before we started this interview, I didn't feel like I could say yes immediately. And I tried to explain to Bob, well, I want to write an article for Time magazine about Jersey Boys. And I don't think I can do both. I don't think I can write the liner notes, which would be in effect working for you, and then be an objective writer for Time magazine. I don't think they'll let me do that. I don't really think Bob, I don't think he really understood that. I mean, to a person like Bob Gaudio, you want to do something, you do it, it's what are these ethical questions, you just do what you should do. Anyway, he said, okay, well, let me know as soon as you can. So I had this dilemma, and I talked to the Jersey Boys publicity. What I really wanted to do was write the liner notes, but I felt it would be better for Jersey Boys if I gave them a big boost in Time magazine. So I had this dilemma, and I talked to the publicity people. Well, what do you think would be better for me to do? And I was hoping the PR guys would say, well, you should write the liner notes. That's more important. But he said, oh, do what you want. So I was kind of undecided. I had lunch with the person who was then the arts editor at Time, and I tried to convince her how great this show was going to be. But Time is a weekly news magazine. It wasn't going to commit to a story months in advance. So she was kind of non-committal. And at the time, I mean, jukebox musicals are tremendously hot right now because of Jersey Boys. But at the time, they weren't doing so well.
Correct,
I mean,
exactly.
there was a play called Lennon that was just bombing. The Beach Boys had bombed on Broadway. Their musical didn't do well. Mainly because it wasn't about the Beach Boys.
Titus Burgess left Jersey Boys in La Jolla to go do the Beach Boys musical.
Right, and the same night that Jersey Boys opened, I believe Almost Heaven opened about John Denver. Right. And I wanted to see that so badly. Colin Donnell was starring in it, and I went to Europe for a few weeks, and it closed. Jersey Boys was still around, of course.
Yeah.
When was the chronology of when you had the dinner with Bob? Had Jersey Boys had opened on Broadway, correct?
No. It was long. It was months before it opened on Broadway. That's how, I mean, Bob, the album had to be produced before the show opened. this
Okay.
was an act of faith by Rhino Records. You know, often these days, if there is a cast album, it comes out later once the show is a hit.
Right, right,
To
right.
produce an album for a show that hasn't even opened and might not be successful is a real leap of faith. But, you know, fortunately, Rhino Records believed in the Four Seasons. So this was months in advance. And one of the things that was discussed at this dinner was, you know, who's going to play Frankie Valli? Because, you know, I had thought it's impossible for anyone to imitate Frankie Valli. Of course, I was wrong. There have been now many Frankie Vallis, many great Frankie Vallis in Jersey Boys.
Right.
But David Noronha was
Yeah.
very good in La Jolla. But he blew out his voice doing it. He had, toward the end of the show in La Jolla was extended several times, and David's voice gave out. I think, if I remember correctly, I think Dominic Nolfi sang it in some of the later performances in La Jolla.
Right, he was in La Jolla, right.
Yeah, and so they still sort of wanted David Noronha to do it, but they said to him, if you're gonna play Frankie on Broadway, you're really gonna have to not smoke, not drink anything. You're gonna have to follow all these rules. They had a code of conduct for him. So I think he was nervous about that, but also he and his family were in California. He didn't really want to uproot his family and go to Broadway. So he decided not to try to go to Broadway. So they're back at square one. They're trying to, so they started auditioning other people. And I learned later that I think John Lloyd Young had actually auditioned for La Jolla and not gotten it.
He did.
But on the night we had dinner was right in the middle of John's auditions, and Gaudio is saying, you know, we saw somebody today. What's his name? John Young, I think is his name. And he did a good job on Can't Take My Eyes Off You. But we're gonna talk to him again tomorrow. We're gonna bring him in tomorrow. And if he can do the falsetto, we may have something here if he can do the falsetto. So of course, within a few days, they had hired John. We know that he passed the audition with flying colors. And meanwhile, I'm trying to decide what to do, and I'm undecided. And finally, Bob called me up and said, "What, you know, you're going to do these liner notes or not? You got to decide." Well, time wasn't going to commit to an article, so I said, "Well, I'll write the liner notes, but don't pay me anything for writing the liner notes. Maybe if you don't pay me, if I don't actually take money from you, maybe I can do both." And so I wrote the liner notes, and that got in the works. And I was still thinking, I'm going to try to interview him for Time or for the article. At the worst, I'm going to do an interview with him, and I'm going to give it to somebody else to write it up. So I went down to Nashville. It's like old home week for me because I grew up about 60 miles south of Nashville. And so Bob has a very nice mansion in the nicest part of Nashville. And so I spent the day with him, and we had lunch, and I had great interview with him, all sorts of background about Jersey Boys and its creation. So So finally, when the show was closer to opening, I went to my old friend, the managing editor of Time, and said, look, come on, let me write this article. I'm not taking any money from these people. Yeah, Charles, but you're writing the liner notes for the cast album. That's like if we did an article about, George Bush, we wouldn't hire a speechwriter for George Bush to do the article. No, you can't do it. So what I did was I gave all my reporting to a friend of mine, Richard Corliss. He didn't really use my reporting because Richard Corliss, who unfortunately has also passed away, one of the great Time writers, mostly a movie and music reviewer. He had this he just wanted to write about the group and how great the music was. And so he wrote this epic article, one of the 2 best articles that have ever been written about the Four Seasons. And he didn't really write it until after the show came out. And it was so long, they didn't actually print it in the magazine, but it was online. It was on Time Online. And Gaudio loved it. So, as far as Gaudio was concerned, everything worked out. I wrote the liner notes. I also got an article in Time that he loved. And in that article, Corliss wrote that the music for in Jersey Boys was better than in Spamalot, and he named a bunch of other plays. The last 4 plays that have won Tonys, he says, the music in Jersey Boys is better than this. So Gaudio loved the article. It all worked out well.
Of course, we have so much to unpack with what you've said so far. Well, going back to Casey and the Sunshine Band opening for the Four Seasons, so I think it's so interesting that that show at Meadowlands wasn't advertised much, but it was on a bus, in New York City and Manhattan at 30 Rock for you to see it. I feel like with the Four Seasons, and this definitely goes in conjunction with the show, how these guys weren't trying to levitate the Pentagon, and that can go with all the bands that were performing at that concert. So I think that's just interesting how the way they marketed themselves was less is more, but what they did advertise on was what they needed the most. So I think they were very smart with their money and just how they went about it. So I had that note there. Also, just off the bat, thank you for keeping your journalistic integrity even after you were retired, because technically, of course, you were still writing and freelancing here and there, but you technically were retired from Time Magazine, and you still, the fact that you had that dilemma, I appreciate that, as a journalist by degree. Hopefully this podcast is still having me count that I'm a journalist. And so that just meant a lot for me to hear, because we knew that you had the dilemma, but we weren't exactly sure what it was. So thank you for telling us. I think if the Four Seasons or just Frankie Valli himself were ever on SNL, and I don't think they ever were. Am I wrong about that? Do you think they ever appeared on?
No, I don't think so. They were on Dick Clark's New Year's Rocking Eve very prominently, ringing in 1977. Of course, they were on the Ed Sullivan Show many times.
Right.
I don't think they were on SNL ever.
That's interesting. I wonder why they weren't in the 70s.
I tell you, a funny show they were on was they were actually, I don't even know if Howard would remember this, but they were on Candid Camera.
I've seen, I didn't see it at the time, but yes, that's played a few times, Charles. Yeah.
You have to find the clip.
They had this funny skit where where they had I forget exactly how it went, but the Four Seasons on the room, and they had teenagers where, you know, the Four Seasons would come and sit down next to the teenagers, and a hidden camera would watch the reactions of, you know, suddenly they're in the room with the Four Seasons. It's, you know, back in those days, it was like if, you know, if Paul McCartney suddenly came into a room and sat down with you.